Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I'm Jawad Tehami and these are the headlines. A delegation of the Human Rights Commission of the OIC visited Pakistan's side of the line of control, where they interacted with the victims of India's ceasefire violations. The military's media wing said the delegation was briefed on the prevalent security situation along the line of control and steps being taken for the protection of civilians. The Pakistan Army says one of its soldiers embraced martyrdom after terrorists opened fire on a military post in North Waziristan district. It said an operation has been launched to eliminate terrorists from the area. The Taliban claim to have captured the capital city of Afghanistan's northern Jozjan province. A Taliban spokesperson said the governor's office, police headquarters and all government buildings have been cleared in Sheberghan. This comes a day after the group seized the capital of southwestern province of Nimroz. In Bangkok, police fired tear gas and rubber bullets at hundreds of protesters demanding political reforms and calling for a change to the coronavirus vaccination drive. A protest movement for democracy rose up last year, calling for the resignation of Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha and changes to the monarchy. Brazil has reported over 1,000 more deaths from COVID-19 and over 42,000 infections overnight. In Pakistan, 95 people lost their lives to the virus, while over 4,700 tested positive in the past 24 hours. Globally, the fatality toll has exceeded 4.2 million, with over 201 million infections. Those were the headlines and detailed stories. Right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back, and now the news in detail. A delegation of the Human Rights Commission of the OIC visited Pakistan's side of the line of control, where they interacted with the victims of India's ceasefire violations. The military's media wing said the delegation was briefed on the prevalent security situation along the line of control and the steps being taken for the protection of civilians. The dignitaries thanked the Pakistan Army for providing them opportunity to witness the ground reality along the LOC.
After listening to the victim, this problem, this violation by the Indian government is real and is not being punished by the international agencies. So I think it has to be documented, it has to be highlighted, because the killing, the suffering is real.
We are here to interact with the refugees from the Indian occupied Kashmir. We are hoping to take their voice as far as possible across the world, and we do recognize the level of sufferance on the other side of the border. We express our solidarity with the Kashmiri people. Justice will happen, and they will exercise their right of self-determination to live under dignity and freedom.
This visit, indeed, is very important because it's come after the decision of the Indian side, which we think it's a very dangerous decision and which violate the human rights for our brother and sister in Jammu and Kashmir, which will change the demographic side.
Of course, there are very sad, very brutal issues in the Indian occupied side of the Kashmir, from right to life, prohibition of torture and ill treatment, right to religion, right to freedom of expression, right to movement, to other rights, right to self-determination. Because in UN Security Council resolution, proper resolution is plebiscite. But unfortunately, the Indian side until today, more than 70 years, did not came to the table for respite, did not recognize the Kashmiri people's right to self-determination.
We are here to help you. We are here to investigate these situations very deeply and again to talk with relevant international organizations. You are talking about the war crime. It's really not simple human rights violations. It's gross human rights violations. It's under the world crime which should be punished.
The Pakistan Army says one of its soldiers has been martyred after terrorists opened fire on a military post in North Waziristan district. The military's media wing said that Pakistani forces responded befittingly to the terrorist attack. It said an operation has been launched to eliminate terrorists from the area. The military said it is determined to eliminate the menace of terrorism from the country. Indian forces have martyred another civilian in occupied Jammu and Kashmir's Budgam district. The occupying troops targeted the youth during a so-called search operation in Manchova area. The occupation forces have imposed a complete communication blackout in the area. The operation was underway till the last reports came in. It comes a day after the Indian troops martyred 2 civilians in Rajouri district. The occupying forces have killed over 400 Kashmiris after New Delhi illegally revoked the valley's autonomy in August 2019. Pakistan has welcomed a UN's statement reaffirming its position on the Jammu and Kashmir dispute. In a statement, the Foreign Office said the UN's position on the dispute is well established and it has not changed. Spokesperson Zahid Hafiz Chaudhry particularly appreciated the timeliness of the statement. He said it coincides with completion of 2 years of India's illegal move of 5th of August 2019 in occupied Kashmir. Chaudhry said these actions violate the international laws and the UN Charter, including the 4th Geneva Convention. He said the statement denies India's envoy's remarks that Jammu and Kashmir is an integral part of India. Spokesperson of the UN Secretary General, Stefan Dujarric, made these remarks 2 days after India assumed the presidency of the UN Security Council. The Taliban claim to have captured the capital city of Afghanistan's northern Jozjan province. A Taliban spokesperson said the governor's office, police headquarters and all government buildings have been cleared in Shabargan. This comes a day after the group seized the capital of southwestern province of Nimroz. Meanwhile, the US said recent actions by the Taliban will not help them gain international legitimacy. At a press briefing, White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said the group can choose to devote the same energy to the peace process. Moreover, the UN envoy told the Security Council that the Afghan war has entered a deadlier phase. Deborah Lyons said more than 1,000 civilians were killed during the past month. At the Security Council meeting, China called on the international community to carry forward the Afghan peace process by fighting terrorism. Beijing's envoy to the UN blamed hasty US withdrawal for the increased violence and rising civilian casualties. Meanwhile, the US and the UK have warned their nationals to immediately leave Afghanistan amid the worsening security situation. Iran has rejected G7 foreign ministers' accusations that it was behind a drone attack on a tanker of Oman last week, calling them psychological warfare. A spokesperson for the Iranian armed forces said Tehran's strategy is to strengthen security in the Persian Gulf. Earlier, G7 foreign ministers said all available evidence shows Iran's role in the attack on the tanker.
The European Union and the United States have renewed their accusations about Iran's involvement in elements threatening the regional security. The group has asked Iran to stop what it called all activities inconsistent with the relevant UN Security Council resolutions. It also called on all parties to play a constructive role in fostering regional stability and peace. At a closed-door meeting of the Security Council, Britain's UN Ambassador Barbara Woodward said the attack was deliberate and targeted. Meanwhile, in a report, US Central Command said the tanker was attacked by a drone produced in Iran. The report added that the drone was loaded with a military-grade explosive. It said the recovered pieces are nearly identical to previously collected samples from Iranian one-way attack drones. After the report, the United States and Israeli defense chiefs Lloyd Austin and Benny Gantz vowed to cooperate closely on regional security. Iran has repeatedly denied involvement, saying the Israeli regime is playing victim to divert attention from its crimes in Palestine. Iran's ambassador to the United Nations also warned Israel against adventurist moves.
And for more on this, we are now joined by Mr. Syed Mohammed Marandi, a political analyst joining us from Tehran. Mr. Marandi, thank you very much for your time at Indus News. First of all, despite Iran's denial, foreign ministers from G7 have claimed that all available evidence shows Tehran's role in attack on a tanker last week. Is this all about to press new Iranian President Ebrahim Raisi?
Yes, without a doubt. The G7 has absolutely no evidence whatsoever that this drone attack was carried out by Iran. And in addition to that, the real question is if they're really concerned about navigation on the high seas and freedom of movement, then they should be responding to the 12 attacks on Iranian tankers over the last year and a half by the Israeli regime. And also the alleged hijacking of another ship that took place 3-4 days ago was not just suspicious, but it was, in my opinion, a false flag operation. Because when the hijackers boarded the ship, they were there for a few hours, and the Persian Gulf region is a very crowded place with many Western military installations. Within minutes, there would be drones flying overhead, airplanes flying overhead, and ships moving to surround the area. So ultimately, when these so-called hijackers left the ship, they would have been monitored and we would know where they went to, but we don't, simply because Western governments or their allies or a combination group carried out this ridiculous adventurism.
So, Mr. Marandi, President Ebrahim Raisi is considered a hardliner. What approach he can adopt to tackle this rising global pressure on Iran?
It's not global pressure, it's pressure from the United States. And the only reason why Westerners like to call him, or Western media likes to call him, a hardliner is because he is insistent that Iran's sovereignty must be respected and that we're no longer in the 19th century where Western countries dictate terms to the rest of the world. The United States and European countries, the P5+1, signed a nuclear deal, and both sides have commitments. Now Western countries want to keep new sanctions, impose new conditions, and then have an agreement. The Iranians are saying that's not acceptable and will not do that because that violates the deal. And because of that, he's called a hardliner.
Okay, Mr. Marandi, Israeli ambassador to the U.S., Gilad Erdan, says Israeli officials want the Iranian government overthrown. Isn't it against the diplomatic norms and a proxy war on Iran?
Yes, without a doubt. But the Israeli regime is a very strange regime. On the one hand, it is an apartheid regime. It carries out ethnic cleansing. And in Syria, on the occupied Golan Heights, which belongs to Syria but is occupied by the Israeli regime, from there the Israelis were supporting both ISIS and Al-Qaeda. So a regime that carries out ethnic cleansing, colonization, supports extremists, it's expected for it to call for the overthrow of a sovereign and independent country.
Syed Mohammed Marandi, thank you very much for talking to Indus News. We really appreciate your time. And now moving on, Israeli fighter jets have launched their raids on the Gaza Strip, violating the May ceasefire with Hamas yet again. In a tweet, the army claimed to have struck a military compound and a missile launch site belonging to Hamas. It said the attack was in response to incendiary balloons launched from the Strip. The alleged site that came under attack was in civilian areas in Gaza. The U.S. has called on Israel, Hezbollah and Lebanon to maintain calm after the escalation of tensions at the border area. U.S. State Department spokesperson Ned Price says the violence jeopardizes Lebanon's stability and sovereignty. In a statement, he said the cross-border strikes put Israelis and Lebanese at risk. He called upon the Lebanese government to urgently bring the area under its control. Earlier, Lebanon called on the UN to pressure Israel for stopping violations of its sovereignty. In a statement, caretaker Prime Minister Hassan Diab said Israel must respect the Security Council resolution. Israel launched airstrikes and fired artillery at areas from where Hezbollah fired rockets towards a disputed area in Israel. Meanwhile, Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi has hailed Hezbollah's effective deterrence. More stories to follow, but right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Brazil has registered more than 1,000 deaths from COVID-19 and over 42,000 new cases overnight. Globally, the fatalities toll has exceeded 4.2 million with over 201 million infections. More in this report.
The highly contagious Delta variant continues to overwhelm healthcare systems and cause lockdowns. In the US, the White House says it anticipates supply chain disruptions worldwide due to the strain that first emerged in India. In hard-hit Florida state, parents of children with special needs have filed a lawsuit against the Republican governor order forbidding mask mandates. Meanwhile, authorities announced that at least half of the US population has been fully vaccinated now. The US Food and Drug Administration said certain lots of AstraZeneca's vaccine made at a problem-plagued Baltimore facility are fit to be shipped outside the country. Meanwhile, in South America, another nation, Argentina, has surpassed the 5 million infection mark.
Argentina does not have high levels of testing. It does not have high levels of double vaccination. Delta strain is possibly spreading through the community. Therefore, the cushion that dissemination has is lower than in other countries unless something I cannot explain happened. And that would be very unusual because we haven't seen it in other countries.
Over in Australia, Victoria has reported the highest daily jump in locally acquired cases this year as the state remains under a 7-day lockdown. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Scott Morrison has ruled out mandatory vaccination. However, state officials said if the vaccination rates are not paced up, the country's healthcare system will be overrun.
This Delta variant spreads so fast. We look up in Sydney today, 5 people who have lost their lives. I think some of those are in their 60s. We saw just this week a gentleman in his 20s. This will go where the vaccine isn't. We don't have enough people vaccinated. We'll finish up with younger people in hospital, otherwise fit and healthy people. Our system will be overrun if we don't bring this under control.
Europe's drug regulator says low blood platelet, dizziness and tinnitus be added to the labels of Johnson & Johnson single-shot vaccine as potential adverse reactions. In Belgium, 7 residents of the nursing home have died after contracting Colombian variant despite being fully vaccinated. Meanwhile, tourists are highly critical of Italy's decision to make the Green Pass mandatory for an array of leisure activities.
Pakistan has reported 95 more deaths from coronavirus overnight, the highest single-day toll since the 19th of May. The health ministry says the virus infected over 4,700 people over the past 24 hours. The ministry says 79,837 cases are active, of which more than 4,200 are critical. According to health authorities, the COVID positivity rate has risen to 8.24. Pakistan has so far registered over 1,063,000 COVID-19 cases with nearly 23,800 deaths. In a tweet, Planning Minister Asad Umar says 33% Pakistanis aged 50 or above have now been vaccinated. Pakistan has urged ASEAN to raise voice against the rising Islamophobia and extremist tendencies around the world. Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi was virtually addressing the ASEAN Regional Forum. Qureshi condemned demographic changes of disputed territories by the illegal occupants. The foreign minister underscored that a peaceful and stable Afghanistan is central to regional peace. He called for an inclusive, broad-based and comprehensive political settlement through intra-Afghan negotiations. Qureshi also apprised the forum about the progress made by Pakistan in the field of counter-terrorism. China has urged ASEAN countries to enhance solidarity and cooperation to maintain regional peace and stability. Foreign Minister Wang Yi made these remarks during a virtual meeting with the bloc's foreign ministers. Wang called on ASEAN states to jointly respond to their common security challenges. He said the region should consolidate its defense against the COVID-19 pandemic. Earlier, addressing the meeting, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said China's growing nuclear arsenal is a matter of deep concern for Washington. Blinken called on Beijing to cease provocative behavior in the South China Sea. He said that China has deviated from its decades-old nuclear strategy based on minimum deterrence. The UN has accused North Korea of developing nuclear and ballistic missiles during the first half of 2021. Its report notes Pyongyang did so in violation of the international sanctions and despite its worsening economic conditions. The report says Pyongyang sought material and technology from overseas. It said officials overseas continue to feel pressure to develop revenue streams. North Korea has been subjected to UN sanctions since 2006 over its nuclear and ballistic missile programs. The Security Council has steadily strengthened sanctions in a bid to cut off funding for the programs. The US says 2 Myanmar citizens have been arrested for plotting to kill their country's UN envoy in New York. Officials said that Thailand's arms dealer, who sells weapons to the Burmese military, hired the duo. The New York's attorney office said the suspects plotted to force Kiamoturn to resign or be killed. It said the men have been charged with conspiracy to assault and make a violent attack upon a foreign official. The suspects can be sentenced to 5 years in prison if found guilty. Earlier this week, the ambassador said Washington had increased his security because of a threat against him. The U.S. State Department has added 5 more alleged militants to its specially designated global terrorist list. The designation blocks individuals any ownership or interest in the U.S. properties. In a tweet, State Secretary Antony Blinken said that designated terrorists belong to Mozambique, Mali, and Somalia. He said ISIS Mozambique leader led the March attack on a hotel in Palma that killed dozens. He said the U.S. is committed to disrupting terrorist financing and limiting their ability to conduct attacks against civilians. Beijing has slammed Australian Foreign Minister's remarks that her country will not change its policy in order to restart talks with China. In a statement, the Chinese embassy in Australia said Canberra has mischaracterized the current problem in ties. The embassy said the difficult situation is the result of Australia's actions against China. It said China hopes that Australia will take practical moves towards improving the relations. Earlier, Australia's Foreign Minister Marise Payne told the Australia-China Business Council that at present, Canberra cannot meet Beijing's conditions. In Thailand, an anti-government demonstration turned violent when participants clashed with the police in Bangkok. More than 1,000 gathered to protest the government's handling of the COVID-19 pandemic and its impact on the economy. The protesters marched towards Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha's office, demanding his resignation. Police sealed off a road near Bangkok's Victory Monument and fired tear gas and rubber bullets to push back the demonstrators. Several groups have held anti-government protests in recent weeks against the pandemic's impact on the country. Thailand has reported 212 deaths from COVID-19 and recorded nearly 22,000 infections today. In Ethiopia, Tigray forces have vowed to reciprocate to central government's threats to deploy entire defensive capability against them. In an interview, a rebel spokesperson warned to march on capital Addis Ababa if the government does not end offensive. This comes after Tigrayan forces entered Amhara and seized Lalibela town, hosting a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The Foreign Ministry warned that Tigray forces' incursion into Amhara and Afar is testing the federal government's patience. It said Tigrayans' advances that have displaced some 300,000 people are forcing the government to change defensive mode. Addis Ababa want to launch an all-out offensive if proposals for a peaceful resolution to the conflict is not accepted. Meanwhile, an official said Amhara regional forces will launch an offensive today against the Tigrayan forces. In Western Sahara, at least 42 migrants have died when their boat capsized in the coastal town of Dakhla. In a tweet, a Spanish rights activist said that 30 women and 8 children were among those killed. Meanwhile, the Moroccan Navy rescued 30 migrants along the coast. Earlier, the Spanish Maritime Rescue Service said it had rescued 63 people near the Canary Islands. Colombia and Panama have agreed to work together to process and organize thousands of stranded migrants. Around 10,000 migrants, mostly from Haiti, are stuck in Colombia's Antioquia province on their way to the US and Canada. Colombian Foreign Minister Marta Lucía Ramirez met her Panamanian counterpart, Erika Moines, in Matete. Talking to the media, Ramirez said the two laid down the standard procedures for migrants' movement into Panama and beyond. She noted human trafficking often goes hand in hand with drug smuggling. For her part, Moines reiterated the two countries' resolve to create a common front to attend to migrants.
We are both transit countries for a migration that does not seek refuge in Panama or Colombia. So we want to involve all of the key actors, both origin or first receivers and the destination countries, so that together we can create protocols and mechanisms that will control the flow and make it safe, always having a humanitarian approach.
Wildfires continue to rage uncontrolled through Europe, forcing thousands to flee. In Greece, President of the Athens Chamber of Commerce and a firefighter have been killed, while 20 people have been injured.
Fire halted traffic on the main highway connecting Athens to the north of the country and damaged electricity installations. More than 150 fires are raging for a fifth day, with the biggest front still burning near Evia Island, the birthplace of the Olympic Games. Hundreds of residents and tourists on the island have been evacuated with the help of ferries and fishing boats. More than 1,000 firefighters and nearly 20 aircraft are deployed, while extra firefighters, planes, helicopters, and vehicles were arriving from the US, France, Switzerland, and other countries. Meanwhile, neighboring Turkey continues to battle its worst ever wildfire that have killed 8 people. 6 more neighborhoods were evacuated, while excavators formed fire breaks to keep flames from another power plant. Earlier in Italy, 2 people died of smoke inhalation in wildfire in the province of Reggio Calabria. Massive fires have also been burning across Siberia and Russia's north for weeks.
NASA's Mars rover Perseverance has failed in its first attempt to grab rock samples on Mars. It drilled its first sample collecting hole in what was a major milestone for the $2.7 billion mission. The space agency later announced data beamed back to Earth indicated that no Mars rock or dirt made it into the sampling tube. The drill hole is the first step of a sampling process that is expected to take about 11 days. The car-sized Perseverance landed in the red planet's Jezero crater this February to search for signs of ancient microbial life. Scientists believe the crater contained a deep lake 3.5 billion years ago, where the conditions may have been suitable for extraterrestrial life. Climate change scientists consider methane to be a major driver of global warming. It is invisible and odorless, but its emissions are responsible for the 30% of warming on a global scale since the pre-industrial era. More in this report.
Methane is the main component of natural gas and is over 80 times more potent than carbon dioxide in the first 20 years after emission. It is produced as a byproduct of the oil and gas industry. Methane is the major component of natural gas and, if captured, can be used as a fuel for power plants and domestic purposes. Its concentration in the atmosphere is currently increasing at a rate of around 1% per year. And experts say tackling methane emissions is the strongest lever they have to slow climate change over the next 25 years.
There is an industrial area here using a lot of methane. Why we have to put it in the sky and contribute to the destruction of our climate? So there must be more rational ways in year 2021 to use methane instead of venting in the atmosphere.
While governments around the world do not usually report leak rate figures, scientists can estimate the leak rate by looking at reported emissions and reported production. A Clean Air Task Force official says it took the images of more than 200 sites across Europe over 3 months. He said most of these sites have been leaking emissions in some way or another. And on the second visit to the same sites revealed the authorities did nothing to fix it and the leakage was still there.
Whether it's a leak or some sort of operational practice, most of these emissions can be reduced at negative or marginal costs to the company. For instance, when you look at the video of the rusted hole in the tank from Italy, you see that could have been detected with the leak detection and repair program. And then the company could have gone and fixed the tank.
Thanks to rapidly advancing technology, a growing fleet of satellites is now aiming to help close the valve on methane by identifying such leaks from space. Scientists from a European technology startup have been able to pinpoint the location, potency, and size of leaks around the world via satellite imagery.
It's time for a short break. We'll be back with more stories. Stay tuned. Another business updates. China's foreign trade has expanded 35.1% year-on-year in the first 7 months of 2021. The General Administration of Customs says total imports and exports spiked to $3.3 trillion. The data shows Beijing's exports grew by 35.2%, while imports rose 34.9%. In July alone, the imports and exports went up 11.5% from 2020. According to the data, the growth marked an increase for the 14th month in a row. The Association of Southeast Asian Nations remained China's #1 trading partner, followed by the US, the EU, and Japan. Another weather situation from around the globe. And that is all for now. The latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus News.